Hi, Lori. Okay, so hi, I'm Pam Fox at pamfox.org. Hi, Lori. So I'm having trouble. I really want to share this into the group, so I'm going to be talking about hiatal hernias. It's not letting me. For some reason, it's not letting me. So if you belong to any of the hiatal hernia support groups, I will ask you to do me a favor and share them into the GERD, hiatal hernia, LPR groups that you belong to. And today I'm going to be talking about why the age of your hiatal hernia is important, why that matters. Okay, so for some of us, we've been symptomatic maybe for a few months, a few years. For others, you've been symptomatic for many, many years. For some of you, you've been symptomatic as long as you can remember. And so maybe you just got the diagnosis of your hiatal hernia, in the last couple of years, but you've been symptomatic for a decade. So the likelihood is that you've had your hiatal hernia for quite some time, or maybe you haven't had a complete hernia, but you've had your stomach pressing up against your diaphragm. Okay, because remember, you can either have your stomach pressing against your diaphragm and it's not herniated, or it can begin to herniate through the diaphragm, and that's when you get a diagnosis of a hiatal hernia. But either way, whether it's pressing against or through, you can be symptomatic. You can have symptoms because of those internal pressures that are created because of that stomach being located where it's not, where it doesn't belong. Remember, the stomach belongs down here, so that there is no internal pressure. Okay, so why does it matter how old your hernia is? Well, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. So the first one is, I've talked about the peritoneum, and how you can go and Google or go on YouTube and Google hiatal hernia surgical repair and watch one of these repairs, and you'll see that one of the first things they do once they get in there is they start incising away that peritoneum. And so all it is, it's a film, it's a membrane that holds everything in its place. So within the abdominal cavity, you have all of your organs, and each of those organs are housed in a membrane, and that's what holds everything in its place in your abdominal cavity, so things don't get all tangled up, particularly your intestines. Everything's got to be kept together where it belongs with that membrane. And so what happens with the hiatal hernia, your stomach hangs out down here below the diaphragm, and over time, pressure pushes your stomach up and against the diaphragm, with one exception, and that's a congenital hiatal hernia, which is where you're born with a hiatal hernia, and that's when the hiatus, that hole in the diaphragm, the esophagus comes through. It's when that hiatus doesn't fully form. So we want a nice tight hiatus like this, a nice small hole, so when that esophagus comes through, the stomach can't come through the hole. Okay, so with a congenital hiatal hernia, that hole doesn't fully form nice and tight. Instead, it's a little bit looser or quite loose. And so then when pressure begins to push that stomach up, it can push it through the hiatus. So then you can have a hiatal hernia from a very early age. But for most of us with hiatal hernias, something pushed that stomach up over time. And I talk a lot about that here on my channel, and I talk about it in my course. There are a whole list of things that can push your stomach up. And so it's really important that you understand and identify what's pushed your stomach up in the first place, because if you want to reverse your hiatal hernia naturally, you've got to eliminate whatever that pressure is in the first place. Okay, otherwise you're fighting an uphill battle trying to move that stomach down and out of the herniated position if something is still pushing it up from underneath. But if you've had a hernia for, so I'm not talking, so we just discussed what a congenital hiatal hernia is. Again, for most of us, we acquire or develop a hiatal hernia later in life, so into our adult years, most of us. And so what happens again is that internal pressure pushes that stomach up against the diaphragm or through the diaphragm. And so we want to unherniate that. But if you've had a hernia for a very long time, what happens is I just talked about the peritoneum. So that membrane that holds everything in its place. So now your stomach is constantly pushing against your diaphragm. So one really common example of this is constipation or bearing down while you pass a bowel movement, that those abdominal muscles contract and push the stomach up against the diaphragm. And so if this is the case, if this has been your pattern, if this has been your norm for a long time, maybe for many, many years, maybe for as long as you can remember, having to bear down, and that stomach pushes up, pushes up, pushes up. So what happens then is it starts to relocate there. The stomach begins to form new membrane. Instead of down here where it belongs, now it's up here, and it relocates itself there. And so in the case with the hiatal hernia, through the diaphragm, it relocates itself there and creates new membranes there within the diaphragm. And again, you can Google a hiatal hernia repair and see them come in and have to excise all of that peritoneum away in order to pull the stomach down, in order to get to it, to get a better idea, to picture what I'm talking about. And so how we reverse a hiatal hernia naturally, what I teach, either here on my channel or at my website, pamfox.org, is to use your hands to find your stomach, which is on your left-hand side below your rib cage, just beneath, your skin and your muscle and your fat. It's just right here. It's just right there. So you can gently move that stomach down. But if you've had, the good news is if you were just recently diagnosed with a hiatal hernia and you haven't been symptomatic for long, that means you haven't had your hiatal hernia for that long. And so the good news for you is it's going to be presumably much easier for you to reverse your hiatal hernia, because you don't have all of those adhesions recreating that new location for your stomach. So you might just have a little bit of a hernia, okay, with a little bit of membrane. And so it's going to be easier to pull that down, to stretch that membrane, that peritoneum. It's very stretchy. Again, if you go and you look at it, you can see it just looks like a film. So it can stretch, they can cut it away. It's not like it's a tight ligament. It can pull. And so the good news is if you have a younger hiatal hernia, then it's going to be easier for you to reverse that. Now, that's not to say hey Paul, that's not to say if you have an older hiatal hernia, if you've had a hiatal hernia for a very long time, that you cannot reverse your hiatal hernia. That's not what I'm saying. It may take you longer, however. So for the longer you've had your hiatal hernia could very well possibly mean that it's going to take you longer to reverse it. And again, if you go and you look at those images of the peritoneum and you see it, you'll see that, yeah, it's going to take me a little bit longer to soften and stretch and move those adhesions in order just to get the stomach down. Okay, so that's number one. Paul's had his hiatal hernia for over 10 years. Yeah. And it's taking you a long time to reverse your hiatal hernia. So Paul's a really good example. He's got an older hiatal hernia. He is very much interested in reversing his hiatal hernia naturally. He's taking those action steps to do so. His diet is very clean. He's doing exercises. He's practicing his breathing, but it's not happening for him overnight. While he is getting relief, it's not an instant fix. It's going to take time. Long time. Not that long. You're getting there, Paul. But for some, yeah, a long time. And it can be, I understand. I mean, you can get very impatient when you're wanting to overcome these symptoms now and feel normal now. If you're having to wait a month or 6 months or a year, that seems like a really long time. So I get it. So the other thing I wanted to mention, so that's number one, is to understand that peritoneum, to understand that your stomach has relocated underneath your diaphragm and created new adhesions there. And so in order to then move that stomach down and out of that herniated position, it's going to take some time and practice and manipulation in order to get that movement. Now, once you do have that movement and you make the connection and you master how to move your stomach down and out of the herniated position, you should likely start to feel some relief from your symptoms, with a couple of exceptions. Now, if you've had some damage to your vagus nerve from long-term pressure on the vagus nerve, that is going to take time to heal. the vagus nerve, you know, it's gonna take, it can heal, but it may take some time. But you know, if you're able to get your stomach unherniated and you're taking immediate pressure off of your lower esophageal sphincter for the first time in months or years, that may give you instant relief. I get a lot of people that tell me that they were able to move their stomach down and they got instant relief from their symptoms. And it's usually because they were able to take that pressure off the lower esophageal sphincter. Now, the lower esophageal sphincter can take time to heal as well if it's had a lot of injury to it over a long period of time. So with that sphincter, again, it's where the esophagus meets the stomach. It's where the two meet, and it's a one-way valve that clamps down tight to keep the contents in the stomach. And so again, with all of that undue pressure on parts of your anatomy that shouldn't be there, you can begin to have injury to those areas. And so those areas have to heal once they're freed up and you remove the pressure. So those things can take time as well. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention for when we think about old hiatal hernias versus younger hiatal hernias is the hiatus. So again, the hiatus is the hole in the diaphragm that the esophagus comes through, okay? And if your stomach is able to herniate through that hole, that means, it can mean a variety of things, but essentially it means that that hole is no longer tight and small. It also means that something is pushing your stomach up. You know, it's not just going to slip up. Something pushes things up. Things don't slip up. Things slip down, they don't slip up. So something pushes your stomach up through that hiatus, and that hiatus is no longer tight and small. So remember that the hiatus, the diaphragm, is muscle tissue. So why would muscle tissue not be tight anymore? Why would it be relaxed? Why would it be dilated or large? So for a variety of reasons, it could be injured and torn, which is more of a rare example, but from trauma to the, you can't see where I'm patting, but trauma to the herniated site, to the rib cage. Maybe you fall off of something. Maybe you have a car accident. Maybe you've been, you know, a puncture wound. So you can have an injury that can damage and injure that hiatus. But for most of us, more likely, the reason that hiatus becomes not so tight and small is because we get older and more sedentary. And even if you are active, if you become a shallow breather and don't breathe into the belly and have full inhalations and exhalations where the lungs are regularly expanding and deflating so that diaphragm is going through its full range of motion, then your diaphragm can get weak and your hiatus can get relaxed and it will get enlarged. Okay, remember it's muscle tissue. So strong, bulked up muscle tissue is tight, and relaxed, weak muscle tissue is loose. Okay, so if you begin to have a large hiatus then, and you pair that with pressure pushing your stomach up, then you begin to have a herniation. And so again, if you've got a hiatal hernia long term, over a long period of time, that means that hiatus could be on the larger side. It could be on the larger side. And so again, if you've got a newer hiatal hernia, the good news is your hiatus probably isn't that large. If it's just barely poking through a little bit, a small new hiatal hernia, which means you're going to be more able to move that stomach down and then tighten up that hiatus so it can't go through again. Okay, but if you have a larger hiatus, that means you've got, you know, a little bit more work to do. It means that it's probably going to take you longer, because, you know, it's going to get tighter and it's going to get smaller and it's going to get tighter and it's going to get smaller, but you've got a longer road ahead of you, right? Hey, Carmen. Hey, I'm going to call you later, or I'm going to text you later. So you've got a longer road ahead of you, right? In order to get that larger hiatus to shrink down. So, so those two things to keep in mind with if you have a newer hiatal hernia versus an older hiatal hernia. It doesn't mean that there's no hope for you if you have an older, you know, long-term hiatal hernia, but it does mean that you may have more work to do. It does mean that it's going to require more effort and patience on your part, because you know what I mean? Like when you set out to do something, you get inspired. Maybe you get inspired, I'm going to reverse my hiatal hernia naturally, and you start doing these exercises. and you're just not getting the results you want, right? Because we just we want fast results, right? That's just who we are this day and age. We want things now. We want them our way. We want them fast, and we don't want to wait around, and we're not very patient. And so it's really easy to just say, I forget it, right? I'll try some on to the next thing. Or maybe, well, I thought I wanted to reverse my hiatal hernia naturally, but now I think I'm just going to have the surgery, which for some people that may be, that may be your only option. Maybe you try this for 2 or 3 years and you just can't get that hiatus to tighten up and keep that stomach down. I would say kudos to you if you hung out for 2 or 3 years and you still couldn't do it before you decided to go the surgical route. But it still can be done with an older hiatal hernia with a larger hiatus. It's just going to take a real commitment. These exercises is not like they're hard. It's not like, you're doing, push-ups or chin-ups or anything like that. They're very gentle. They can take 5 to 10 minutes a day. I advise that you do them about 5 minutes a day, twice a day. So once in the morning, once in the evening. Do them first thing in the morning while you're still in bed. Do them last thing at the end of the day, right before you fall asleep. I used to set an alarm on my clock and do them on my lunch break. I would literally go lay down in the corner of a room and hope nobody would walk in and find me there and be like, oh my gosh, why are you on the floor? That did happen from time to time. And I would just do them consistently. So you just have to make that commitment that I'm going to do this every day. I'm going to practice these exercises. I'm going to practice the breathing. I'm going to do it every day. Paul asks, how long did it take you to reverse your hernia? That's a good question, Paul. I kind of have to guess when I give this answer, but to me it was, I started out with the diet, the plant-based diet, and I got improvement. So that was over the course of 2 or 3 years. I got improvement, but then when I began to do the self-manipulation and get the stomach down, it probably took me, again, going in and doing these exercises daily, it probably only took me a couple of weeks to really make the connection and get that movement where I was fully unherniated. And then I got instant relief. And then it was just like, oh my gosh, I've discovered the answer. I just have to hold my stomach down for the rest of my life and I'll be fine. And that's what I did for quite some time. But when I started incorporating the breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing exercises that I teach that are specific for hiatal hernia, I just got better and better. My symptoms became less and less. I became symptomatic less and less. I had fewer, I guess you could call flare-ups, where I went from, being symptomatic, on one extreme end all the time to being, just less and less and less symptomatic, to the point where it was like, I would think to myself, gosh, it's been like 2 weeks since I've had a flare-up. Oh my goodness, yay. And then it would be, oh my gosh, it's been like a month since I've had a flare-up. So it was gradual. And then I would start to notice, Paul, that I would go like a month without having any symptoms, and then I would have symptoms. So again, that stomach starts pressing up against the diaphragm again, pushing on that lower esophageal sphincter. And I really started being faithful with my diaphragmatic breathing exercises, and that was such a game changer for me, because that's what tightens your hiatus and will keep that stomach down where it's meant to be. And then just, relaxing, learning how to breathe into the belly, relaxing the abs. There's always room for that stomach to keep down where it belongs. But Paul also asks, what's the longest you've seen it take for someone to reverse theirs? Well, the longest, I've talked about this before. I've only been teaching this I've been teaching this for a little, I just launched my course in April, but I've been teaching it for quite some time before that. But there is someone, it's been, I would say 14 months. It took her to reverse. And she was doing everything. She was doing diet, she was doing herbs, she was doing supplements, she was doing self-manipulation, she was doing the breathing, she was doing heel drops, she was blowing up balloons. So she was doing a lot of things, and it took her about 14 months, and she was very, very committed. So yeah, I think that, you know, and I say this all the time, it just depends on, Paul, if you, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but if you would do me a favor and share this into the groups. I can't, my share button's not activated right now for some reason. I hope I haven't been put in Facebook jail. That would be terrible. But it's I don't have the ability to share. So if you would do that, that'd be great. But yeah, so, what was I saying? I forget. All right. Well, I think I said everything I wanted to say. So, if you guys have any questions, be sure you post them in the comments box below, and I always try to get to 2 or 3 of those questions. So, yeah. Oh, you're welcome. Okay, your phone's acting funny. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching.